The Last Gunslinger. The setting sun painted the New Mexico desert in shades of amber and gold, casting long shadows across the porch of the Rusty Spur Saloon where Jackson Wade sat in his weathered rocking chair. His calloused hands methodically cleaned an ancient Colt revolver, muscle memory from 40 years of the same ritual. The weapon hadn't been fired in anger for nearly a decade, but old habits died hard. At 65, Jackson was the last of his kind in Hollow Creek. The town had changed around him, trading horses for hybrid cars and saloon poker for smartphone games. But he remained, a living relic of a time when justice came from the barrel of a gun and a man's word was his bond. The first sign that something was wrong came when the crickets fell silent. Jackson's hand stilled on the revolver as he noticed the unnatural quiet spreading across the desert. The air grew heavy, charged with an electricity that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Even the perpetual desert wind died, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. Then came the light, a brilliant purple-white beam that split the darkening sky. Jackson watched, transfixed, as what he first took for a meteor descended toward the desert floor. But meteors didn't change direction mid-fall, and they certainly didn't land with the deliberate grace of a falling feather. The object touched down about a mile out, in the flat expanse locals called the Devil's Dancing Ground. A shimmer of light rippled outward from the landing site, distorting the air like heat waves off summer asphalt. Jackson stood slowly, his joints protesting the sudden movement. The rational part of his mind told him to go inside, call the authorities, and let them handle whatever this was. But 4 decades of being the one people turn to in a crisis had ingrained different instincts. He strapped on his gun belt, checked his revolver one final time, and started walking. The desert night was coming on fast now, but the landing site glowed with an inner light that made it easy to track. As he drew closer, the air grew noticeably cooler, carrying a strange metallic taste. What he found defied explanation. A being of living crystal stood in the center of a perfect circle of glass-smooth sand. It was roughly humanoid in shape, but its body was composed of translucent, geometric fragments that shifted and realigned with each movement. Light seemed to flow through its form like liquid starlight. The creature turned to face him, revealing what might have been a face, a collection of crystalline surfaces that reflected the last rays of sunlight in mesmerizing patterns. Jackson's hand instinctively moved to his revolver, but he kept it holstered. Something told him that if this being meant him harm, a 6-shooter wouldn't make much difference. Jackson Wade, the creature spoke, its voice resonating like wind through crystal chimes. I am Zyrith, and I have crossed 12,000 light-years to find you. Jackson removed his hat, partly out of ingrained politeness and partly to get a better look at the impossible being before him. Reckon you've got the wrong man, friend. I'm just a retired gunslinger who tends bar sometimes. The crystalline being's form shifted, creating what might have been a gesture of disagreement. You are far more than that, though you do not remember. The universe stands on the brink of darkness, and you, all of humanity, are needed once again. Now hold on, Jackson said, raising a hand. I've lived in this town most of my life. Never been further than Dallas. Whatever you're looking for dash. The memories were sealed away, Zyrith interrupted, its form pulsing with increasing urgency. A necessary deception to protect Earth until the time was right. But they are coming now, the Void Seekers, and the seals must be broken. Before Jackson could respond, the crystal being raised what might have been an arm. A beam of pure light struck Jackson's forehead, and the world exploded into fragments of memory and sensation. He saw impossible things, vast ships sailing between stars, battles fought with weapons that could shatter planets, and humanity standing as guardians against a darkness that devoured entire galaxies. When the vision cleared, Jackson found himself on his knees in the cooling sand. His head throbbed with echoes of memories that couldn't possibly be his, yet felt as familiar as his own reflection. What? He gasped, struggling to his feet. What was that? The beginning, Zyrith replied. A crack in the wall that hides your true nature. The Void Seekers have found Earth again, and this time, they will not stop until everything is consumed. We need the Guardians to return. We need you to remember. Jackson looked down at his hands, weathered by years of desert sun and honest work, then up at the darkening sky. The stars were emerging, and for the first time in his life, they looked less like distant lights and more like old friends he'd forgotten he knew. "How long do we have?" he asked, his voice steady despite the world-shaking revelations of the past few minutes. "Days, perhaps hours," Xyrath answered. "They follow close behind me. This town will be their first target, a small test of Earth's defenses before the main invasion begins." Jackson nodded slowly, his mind already shifting into the familiar patterns of tactical planning that had served him well in his younger days. "Then we'd better get back to town. If trouble's coming, folks need to be ready." As they walked back toward the lights of Hollow Creek, Jackson felt the weight of his revolver at his hip, a reminder of simpler days when the biggest problems could be solved with steady aim and quick reflexes. Something told him the coming days would require much more than that, but it was comforting nonetheless. The stars continued to emerge above them, and with each passing moment, Jackson felt more memories stirring in the depths of his mind, like ancient machinery coming back to life after a long slumber. Whatever he had been before, whatever battles lay ahead, one thing was certain: Hollow Creek was his home, and he would defend it with everything he had, whether that meant six-shooters or stellar weapons he didn't yet remember how to use. Human civilization might have forgotten its role as guardians of the galaxy, but the galaxy hadn't forgotten them. And now, starting with one old gunslinger in a small desert town, it was time to remember. Starlight memories. The Rusty Spur Saloon had seen its share of strange sights over the years, but nothing quite like the crystalline being that now stood beside its worn oak bar. Jackson Wade moved through the familiar space, pulling down the shades and locking the doors. The fewer witnesses to what was about to happen, the better. "Your kind always did prefer these gathering places," Xyrath observed, its crystalline form casting prismatic patterns across the walls. "Even when you sailed between stars, you created spaces like this, warm, wooden, filled with the scent of Earth." Jackson paused in his tasks, struck by a flash of memory. A vast chamber lined with timber salvaged from a dozen worlds, star-faring humans gathering to share stories of distant constellations. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, leaving him disoriented. "These memories you're stirring up," Jackson said, steadying himself against the bar. "They feel real, but they can't be. Humans haven't even reached Mars yet, let alone other stars." Xyrath's form shifted, creating what might have been a gesture of gentle contradiction. "That is the greatest deception of all. Humanity didn't start on Earth, you ended here. This planet was meant to be a sanctuary, a place of recovery after the Great War against the Void Seekers." The crystalline being approached the bar's ancient mirror, its reflection fragmenting into 1,000 points of light. "Watch," it said, raising a crystalline appendage to the glass. The mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water, and images began to form. Jackson saw vast ships, their hulls gleaming with symbols that stirred something deep in his soul. He watched as humans in advanced armor strode through alien landscapes, serving as peacekeepers and guardians. The images showed humanity at its peak, not conquerors, but protectors of a galaxy teeming with life. "We were your allies," Xyrath explained as the scenes unfolded. "My people, the Crystalline Collective, served as record-keepers and advisors. Together with other races, we formed the Guardian Accord. For 10,000 years, we maintained peace across the galaxy." The images darkened, showing massive shapes moving between stars, devouring light itself. Then came the Void Seekers. "They are not truly alive as we understand it, they are gaps in reality, hungry spaces that consume everything they touch. Your people stood against them when all others fled." Jackson watched as human ships engaged the darkness, wielding weapons that could reshape space itself. But the enemy was vast, and for every victory, another world fell to darkness. The cost of war mounted until... "We were losing," Jackson whispered, the words rising from memories he didn't know he had. Not just battles, we were losing ourselves. Every engagement with the Void Seekers corrupted more of our people, turned them into. Yes, Xyrath confirmed. The decision was made to retreat, to save what remained of humanity's soul. Earth was chosen, a young world, far from the galactic core. Your memories were sealed away, your technology dismantled. You would live as natives of this world until the time came when you were needed again. The mirror cleared, returning to its normal reflection. Jackson studied his weathered face, trying to reconcile the man he knew with the cosmic warrior he had apparently once been. His hands, rough from years of honest work, had once guided starships through the depths of space. Why me? He asked finally. Why come to an old gunslinger in a forgotten town? Xyrath's form pulsed with what might have been amusement. You were never truly retired, Jackson Wade. Your position here was no accident. Earth has many hidden guardians, people placed in key locations, living ordinary lives while unconsciously watching for signs of the enemy's return. Your instincts, your sense of duty, your inability to truly lay down your weapons, these were echoes of your true purpose. As if in response to these words, Jackson's revolver seemed to pulse with a subtle energy. He drew it, finding the familiar weight changed somehow. In the barrel's blued steel, he caught reflections of strange symbols that hadn't been there before. Your weapons remember, even if you do not, Xyrath said. That revolver was once something far more powerful. As your memories return, it too will awaken. A distant rumble shook the bottles behind the bar. Jackson moved to the window, pulling back the shade just enough to peek outside. The stars were wrong, some of them were moving, descending toward Earth with purpose. They're here already, he said, his voice steady despite the fear trying to claw its way up his throat. Those memories you unlocked, the powers you mentioned, I'm going to need them fast. Xyrath moved beside him, its crystalline body humming with energy. Then we must complete the awakening. It will be painful, and once done, there is no returning to the simple life you knew. Are you prepared for that? Jackson thought of his town, of Earth, of a galaxy he was only beginning to remember. He thought of all the people going about their lives, unaware of the ancient war about to revisit their world. His answer came without hesitation. Do it, he said, holstering his revolver and turning to face the crystalline being. Wake me up. Xyrath raised both arms, and light began to pour from its form. As the energy enveloped Jackson, he felt the weight of centuries pressing against his mind. Somewhere in the distance, the first sounds of battle began to echo across the desert night. The war for Earth's survival was about to begin, and humanity's long sleep was finally coming to an end. Desert storm rising. The awakening hit Jackson like a supernova. Ancient knowledge flooded his consciousness, star maps, battle formations, weapons that could tear holes in reality itself. His bones ached with remembered centuries, his mind struggling to contain memories of 1,000 worlds and 100 lifetimes. Through the haze of revelation, he heard the screams begin. The Void Seekers had reached Hollow Creek. Their first forms were simple, dark shapes sliding between buildings, testing Earth's defenses. But Jackson now remembered what they truly were, living holes in reality, hungry spaces that devoured light, matter, and life itself. Your weapon, Xyrath urged, its crystalline form blazing with emergency protocols. Remember what it truly is. Jackson drew his revolver, feeling the metal shift and change beneath his fingers. The familiar Colt transformed, ancient nanomachines awakening from their long slumber. The barrel elongated, strange geometries flowering along its length. The cylinder became a swirling vortex of energy, and the grip melded perfectly to his palm. Stellar Peacekeeper, he whispered, the weapon's true name coming back to him. Old friend, we've got work to do. He burst through the saloon doors into chaos. Dark shapes prowled the streets, their presence distorting the very air around them. Citizens ran in panic, uncomprehending of the cosmic horror that had descended upon their small town. A child's scream cut through the night, young Ruby Thompson, cornered by one of the shadow creatures. Jackson's body moved with inherited grace, muscle memory from centuries of combat taking over. He aimed the transformed weapon and pulled the trigger. Instead of a bullet, a concentrated burst of stellar energy erupted from the barrel, striking the Void Seeker. The creature recoiled, its darkness temporarily pierced by living light. "Get to the church!" Jackson shouted to the girl and her terrified mother. "Tell everyone you see, the church is sanctuary." He remembered now why places of worship had power against the Void Seekers. Humanity had encoded their ancient defenses into every culture's holy places, hiding shield generators in steeples and protection grids in foundation stones. The old church at the heart of Hollow Creek was more than it appeared. "Our priority is activation," Zyrith declared, gliding beside him as they moved through the streets. "The church's defenses must be awakened before the main force arrives." Another shadow creature lunged from an alley. Jackson spun, his weapon transforming again, this time into something like a sword made of frozen starlight. The blade passed through the Void Seeker, and for a moment, reality itself seemed to scream. More townspeople were running toward the church, guided by some unconscious recognition of safety. Sheriff Reeves stood at the steps, directing people inside, his service pistol looking pitifully inadequate against the cosmic threat. "Wade!" Reeves called out. "What in God's name is happening?" "Later, Tom," Jackson replied, taking the church steps 3 at a time. "Right now, I need you to trust me. Keep everyone inside, no matter what you hear." Inside the church, Jackson moved with purpose toward the altar. His awakened memories showed him what to look for: subtle marks in the woodwork, patterns in the stained glass that weren't quite religious symbols. Each was a piece of dormant technology, waiting for the right key to activate. "The sequence," he muttered, hands moving across hidden panels. "Help me remember the sequence." Zyrith's crystalline form pulsed with transmitted data. "The primary node is beneath the altar." "But Jackson, the activation will draw their attention." "All of their attention." A deep boom shook the building. Through the windows, they could see larger shapes descending from the sky, capital ships of the Void Seeker fleet, each one a massive tear in the fabric of space. "Better hurry then," Jackson said, dropping to his knees beside the altar. His fingers found the hidden catches, and the ancient wood slid away to reveal technology that hummed with recognition. As he worked, he felt more memories crystallizing. He remembered the first time humanity had encountered the Void Seekers, remembered watching whole worlds vanish into their hungry darkness. He remembered the decision to hide on Earth, to give up the stars in exchange for a chance to preserve what made them human. The activation sequence was almost complete when the church doors burst open. A Void Seeker in its true form entered, a walking piece of nothing, a shape that hurt the eyes to look at. Where it stepped, reality seemed to fray and unravel. "Get clear!" Jackson shouted to the huddled townspeople, raising his weapon. The gun transformed again, becoming something that could charitably be called a cannon. Ancient runes blazed along its length as it charged with power drawn from the very fabric of spacetime. The Void Seeker moved with liquid grace, its form rippling with hungry anticipation. It recognized him now, not as the old gunslinger, but as what he truly was, a guardian of humanity, one of the ancient enemies it had fought across the stars. "Remember this," Jackson growled, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "Remember why your kind feared us." He pulled the trigger just as Zyrith completed the activation sequence. Light erupted from every window of the church, and for a moment, the night was as bright as day. The Void Seeker screamed, a sound that existed somewhere between frequencies, between dimensions, as it was caught between Jackson's weapon and the awakening defense grid. The creature dissolved, its nothingness scattered to the winds. But through the windows, they could see more shapes descending. The real battle was just beginning. "The grid will hold for now," Zyrith announced, its crystalline form interfacing with the activated systems. "But they will bring bigger weapons. Planet killers. Jackson checked his weapon, feeling the ancient power humming through its transformed structure. Then we'd better come up with a plan fast. I didn't wake up from a century-long nap just to watch my town get eaten by cosmic horrors. Outside, the Void Seeker ships continued to gather, their impossible geometries blocking out the stars. But for the first time since they appeared, Jackson felt something like hope. He wasn't just a retired gunslinger anymore, he was a guardian of humanity, and he remembered why the darkness had feared them. The war for Earth had begun, and this time, humanity would fight with all of its ancient power restored. Breaking Dawn's shield. The church's defense grid hummed with ancient power, casting a dome of translucent energy over Hollow Creek. Inside, Jackson Wade stood at the altar, now transformed into a tactical command center as dormant technology awakened throughout the building. Holographic displays flickered in the air, showing the movements of Void Seeker ships above the town. 3 hours, Xyrath announced, its crystalline-formed processing data streams. That's how long the grid will hold against their current forces. After that, the being's form dimmed slightly. Jackson nodded, studying the tactical displays with eyes that remembered reading similar screens aboard starships. Then we've got 3 hours to wake up the rest of the sleepers in the region. We're not the only guardians out here, are we? No, Xyrath confirmed. There are others within range, a teacher in Phoenix, a mechanic in Santa Fe, a librarian in Albuquerque. Each one a dormant warrior, waiting to remember. Sheriff Reeves approached, his face pale but determined. Like many in the town, he'd taken the revelations about Jackson's true nature with remarkable composure. When the world stops making sense, sometimes the only option is to adapt. My deputies have finished evacuating the outlying farms, Reeves reported. Everyone's either here or in the basement of the old bank. But Wade, those things are starting to change the landscape. Everything they touch turns wrong somehow. Jackson moved to the window. Beyond the shield, the desert was transforming. Where Void Seekers passed, reality buckled and warped. Plants twisted into impossible shapes, and the very ground seemed to ripple like water. They weren't just invading Earth, they were trying to remake it into something that better suited their nature. We need transport, Jackson said, turning back to Xyrath. Fast transport. There has to be something hidden nearby. The crystalline being's form shifted in affirmation. The old ranch, 3 miles north. What you thought was a collapsed mine shaft is actually a hangar, Jackson finished, more memories surfacing. Of course. Never could figure out why I bought that worthless piece of land. He checked his transformed weapon, feeling the power thrumming through it. Tom, you're in charge here. Work with Xyrath to coordinate the town's defense. I'm going to wake up our reinforcements. The Void Seekers will try to stop you, Xyrath warned. They remember how dangerous humanity became when united. They will do anything to prevent the Guardians from gathering. Jackson managed a grim smile. Let them try. He moved through the crowded church, passing familiar faces now looking at him with a mixture of fear and hope. These were his people, whether he was a simple gunslinger or an ancient cosmic warrior. He had protected them before, and he would protect them now. The moment he stepped beyond the shield, the air changed. It felt thinner somehow, as if reality itself was being stretched too thin. His weapon hummed in response, ancient technologies adapting to the altered environment. He ran north, memories of military training from 1,000 years ago making his movements swift and sure. The first Void Seeker appeared when he was halfway to the ranch, a massive construct of living darkness that rose from the twisted landscape like smoke given form. Jackson didn't break stride. His weapon transformed, becoming something that looked like a cross between a rifle and a piece of abstract art. He fired on the move, each shot releasing a burst of compressed spacetime that punched holes through the creature's non-matter form. The Void Seeker screamed and collapsed, but 2 more took its place. They were learning, adapting their tactics. One tried to flank him while the other attacked head-on. Jackson's body remembered moves he never learned in this lifetime. He rolled, his weapon splitting into dual pistols that fired beams of coherent starlight. The Void Seekers recoiled, their darkness pierced by weapons designed eons ago to fight their kind. The ranch appeared ahead, its weathered buildings hiding secrets older than human civilization. Jackson spotted the collapsed mine shaft, recognizing now the subtle geometries worked into its seemingly random debris. A massive shape detached itself from the darkness above, a Void Seeker capital ship, descending to stop him. Its presence distorted everything around it, turning the air itself into something alien and hostile. Not today, Jackson growled. He raised his weapon, letting it transform into its ultimate configuration. The gun became something magnificent and terrible, a device that could punch holes in reality itself. He fired, and for a moment, the laws of physics took a lunch break. The beam that erupted from his weapon wasn't energy or matter, but something more fundamental. It was order itself, focused into a weapon against entropy's champions. The capital ship tried to absorb the blast, but this was the kind of weapon that had made humanity feared across the galaxy. The beam punched through the ship's non-matter hull, causing cascading reactions that made it collapse in on itself. Jackson reached the mine shaft entrance, his hands finding hidden controls. Ancient machinery rumbled to life, and the debris field shifted, revealing a sloping tunnel that led deep underground. Inside, he found what he'd unknowingly protected for decades, a hangar containing a sleek craft that looked like someone had tried to build a fighter jet out of liquid mercury and starlight. "Hello, beautiful," he whispered, approaching the ship. Its systems came online at his presence, recognizing its ancient pilot. As he climbed into the cockpit, more memories slotted into place. He remembered flying ships like this through battle zones that spanned whole solar systems. Remembered the feel of controls that responded to thought as much as touch. The hangar roof opened, revealing a sky now thick with Void Seeker ships. But Jackson wasn't worried. He had a fast ship, ancient weapons, and coordinates for more sleeping guardians. Most importantly, he had something the Void Seekers could never understand: hope. "Time to wake up the neighbors," he said, and the ship rose into the war-torn sky, ready to help humanity remember its true nature. When stars remember. Dawn was breaking over New Mexico, though you wouldn't know it from looking at the sky. The Void Seekers' capital ships blotted out the sun, their impossible geometries casting shadows that moved in ways shadows shouldn't. But humanity was remembering, and with memory came hope. Jackson Wade's stolen ship screamed through the upper atmosphere, pursued by shapes that defied description. In the 6 hours since he'd left Hollow Creek, he'd awakened 5 other guardians. Now they flew in formation behind him: Rachel Torres, the Phoenix schoolteacher whose ruler had become a weapon that could slice through dimensions; Marcus Chen, the Santa Fe mechanic whose garage tools now controlled gravity itself; and others, each remembering who they truly were. Multiple contacts, closing fast. Rachel's voice crackled over the calm. Her teacher's patience had been replaced by a warrior's focus. "They're trying to box us in." "Let them try," Jackson replied, his hands dancing over controls that responded to thought and touch alike. "Everyone remember the plan? We're not trying to win this fight, we just need to hold them off long enough for Zyrith to complete the awakening protocol." Back in Hollow Creek, the crystalline being was using the church's ancient systems to broadcast a wake-up signal across the planet. Every sleeping guardian, every hidden warrior would remember their true nature. But it would take time, and the Void Seekers knew it. A blast of unlight streaked past Jackson's ship, turning a cloud into something that hurt the eyes to look at. He rolled, his vessel responding with impossible grace, and returned fire. Weapons built from crystallized starlight lashed out, piercing the darkness. "Wade," Marcus called out, "we've got a problem. They're starting to affect the magnetic field. If they disrupt it enough, Earth dies," Jackson finished grimly. He remembered now how the Void Seekers had killed worlds before, not with brute force, but by subtly altering the fundamental forces that made life possible. His tactical display showed more ships rising to join them, guardians awakening across the southwest, then across the country, then around the world. But the Void Seekers were escalating too. Their capital ships were moving into position for something big. "They're forming a null-space lattice," Rachel reported, her ancient knowledge surfacing. If they complete it. Jackson knew what that meant. The lattice would create a web of unreality around the planet, slowly contracting until Earth itself was consumed. They had maybe minutes to prevent it. "New plan," he announced. "Rachel, Marcus, take your teams and keep the new Guardians organized. Buy Xyrath as much time as possible." He turned his ship toward the largest concentration of Void Seeker vessels. "I'm going to give them something else to think about." "Jackson, that's suicide," Marcus protested. "Even with your memories back, you can't take on their fleet alone." "Who said anything about alone?" Jackson's ship sensors had detected something, a familiar energy signature approaching from deep space. He smiled. "Cavalry's coming." Right on cue, space itself seemed to tear open. Through the rent in reality came ships, hundreds of them, thousands, their hulls gleaming with the same symbols that adorned Jackson's weapon. The lost fleet of humanity, hidden beyond the edge of space, waiting for the signal to return. "This is Admiral Diana Chen," a new voice announced on all frequencies. "The Guardian fleet has returned. All awakened warriors, coordinate your attacks with our targeting data. Let's remind these cosmic horrors why they feared us." The sky erupted in battle. Guardian ships engaged the Void Seekers in maneuvers that bent space itself. Jackson led his squadron straight for the forming null-space lattice, his weapon configurations changing with each new threat. Below, more Guardians were awakening. The Void Seekers had thought to find a defenseless planet, but instead, they'd walked into a trap generations in the making. Every human they dismissed as primitive carried within them the potential to become their ancient enemy. The battle reached its crescendo as the sun finally broke through, its light catching on crystalline ships and transformed weapons. The Void Seeker's lattice collapsed under concentrated fire from the Guardian fleet, its unreality harmlessly dispersing into space. In Hollow Creek, Xyrath's signal reached full power. The wave of awakening spread across the globe like a dawn that couldn't be stopped. The time of sleep was over. Hours later, Jackson stood on the church steps, watching Guardian ships patrol the sky alongside human fighter jets. The world was changed forever, but perhaps that wasn't a bad thing. Humanity had hidden long enough. "What happens now?" Sheriff Reeves asked, joining him on the steps. Jackson looked at his weapon, now comfortably shifting between revolver and stellar cannon as needed. "Now we rebuild. Find a balance between what we were and what we've become." He smiled slightly. "Reckon the universe could use some good old-fashioned human wisdom mixed with its cosmic war." Xyrath approached, its crystalline form gleaming in the restored sunlight. "The Guardian Council will need to be reformed. They will look to you, Jackson Wade. You who bridged both worlds, who kept watch while others slept." Jackson shook his head. "They'll look to all of us. Every human who held on to their humanity while carrying the weight of the stars in their souls." He gazed up at the sky, seeing not empty space but familiar constellations that had once been home. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us." The sun continued to rise over Hollow Creek, its light catching on the transformed landscape. There would be challenges ahead, helping humanity adjust to its remembered nature, rebuilding their ancient alliances, standing watch against the darkness between stars. But they would face it together, with wisdom earned in 2 lives, one among the stars, and one in the quiet places where old gunslingers kept their watch. The universe had changed, but some things remained constant: the importance of standing together, of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, and of remembering who you truly are, even when the whole cosmos conspires to make you forget. Jackson Wade, Guardian of Humanity, adjusted his hat and walked back into his saloon. There were stories to be told, memories to be shared, and a future to be built. After all, Even cosmic warriors needed a place to rest their feet and remember where they came from. The stars waited above, patient and eternal, ready for humanity's return.